Welcome back to the Storytelling Dad. This is where we tell stories of fathers, their love, their heartbreak, their quiet sacrifices. If these stories move you, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined our family here. Tonight's story is one that still echoes in my memory. It's called, "My Daughter Said Her Stepdad Was Her Real Father, So I Stayed Silent at the Dinner Table." The table looked beautiful that evening. A roasted chicken sat in the center, candles flickered, glasses clinked. Laughter filled the air like music. Everyone seemed comfortable, happy, everyone except me. My daughter sat across from me. She wasn't a little girl anymore. Her hair glowed in the candlelight, her smile so full of life. And next to her sat her stepfather, confident, relaxed, almost as if he had always been there. And then she said it. She turned to him and, with a smile, whispered words that pierced me deeper than silence ever could. "I'm glad you're my real dad." The room kept buzzing. Forks clinked, people laughed, no one stopped. But for me, the world froze. My chest tightened. My hand shook around my fork. My ex-wife said nothing. Her husband looked awkward, shifting in his seat. And me? I was invisible at my own daughter's table. I wanted to speak, to remind her of the nights I held her through storms, the mornings I tied her shoes, the years I worked so she never went without. I wanted to shout, "I was here first. I am still here," but no words came. So I smiled instead, that brittle smile fathers wear when silence feels safer than truth. I raised my glass, nodded at stories I couldn't hear, and let the night go on without me. That night, I wasn't her father. I was a shadow at the end of the table. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that hummed louder than any radio ever could. Streetlights slipped across my windshield in long yellow streaks, and in between them, I caught glimpses of my own reflection. My face looked older than I remembered, not just from time but from the weight of moments like these. I pulled into my small driveway, the house dim and still, and for a long while I sat there in the car, staring at the dark window. My daughter's words kept circling in my head, each repetition carving the wound deeper. "I'm glad you're my real dad." It wasn't the first time life had asked me to swallow pain in silence, but this cut differently. It was not from an enemy, nor a stranger. It was from the very person I had carried on my shoulders, the little girl who once wrapped her arms around my neck and called me her hero. Inside, the house smelled faintly of sawdust and old coffee. I dropped my keys on the table and sank into the worn armchair, the one that had seen years of bedtime stories and late-night worries. For a moment, I closed my eyes and drifted backward. I remembered her first birthday I spent with her after the divorce. Money was tight, but I bought balloons, baked a cake from a box, and strung paper streamers across the living room. She was only 4, but her eyes lit up like I'd given her the world. That was the night she fell asleep in my arms, face smeared with frosting, whispering, "Daddy, you're the best." I thought about the afternoons when I rushed from work to catch her school plays, clapping louder than anyone else in the crowd. I thought about her scraped knees, the wobbly bike rides where I jogged behind her, heart pounding until she pedaled free. These memories came uninvited, flooding me with warmth and sorrow in equal measure. Somewhere along the years, my role had been rewritten, my title reassigned. The man who had once been Dad was now sitting outside the circle, a guest at the table of his own child's life. I walked over to the shelf where a small wooden box rested. I opened it carefully, as though it might crumble at my touch. Inside were relics of a life shared. Her kindergarten drawings, Father's Day cards made of colored paper and glue, a photo of us at the beach, her hand clutching mine, sand clinging to our feet. Each piece was proof, a quiet testimony that I had been there, that I still was. I pressed one of the old cards to my chest. The crayon letters were uneven but clear. "I love you, Daddy." My throat tightened, but I whispered anyway, to the empty room. "I love you too, sweetheart, even if you've forgotten." The clock ticked steadily, marking time like a reminder that life would keep moving whether I could keep up or not. Outside, the world slept. Inside, I sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, surrounded by memories that no one else would see, trying to gather the strength for whatever came next.
The next morning, I found myself staring at the mirror longer than usual. My reflection looked tired, the kind of tired that seeps into the bones and stays there. A faint line had deepened near my eyes, maybe from years of smiling through pain. Or maybe from nights like last night, when silence had been my only answer. I poured coffee into my chipped mug, the one my daughter had painted for me when she was 6. The words "best dad ever" were written in uneven strokes, the colors faded but still stubbornly clinging to the ceramic. I held it carefully, as though it were the most fragile thing I owned, and in many ways, it was. As the steam rose, so did the memories. I remembered her 5th birthday, when I stayed up late blowing balloons until I nearly passed out. She had run into the living room the next morning, eyes wide, shouting with joy. I had given her a dollhouse I built from scraps of wood in the garage. The roof was crooked, the paint uneven, but she hugged me like I had handed her a castle. I thought of Christmas mornings, when money was thin, but I still found a way to make her smile. A stuffed bear, a pair of skates from a thrift store, a scarf I knitted clumsily but wrapped with pride. She had once said, "Dad, you make magic out of nothing." I believed her then. These flashes of fatherhood didn't just remind me of the past. They asked me questions I couldn't answer. Where did that bond go? How could something so strong feel so invisible now? I walked over to the bookshelf, pulled down a photo album, and flipped through pages filled with her childhood. There we were at the park, me pushing her on the swing. There we were at the beach, her tiny hands clutching seashells. There we were at her first school recital, me clapping until my palms ached. Each photo was a frozen truth. I had been there. I had loved her fiercely. I had tried, always tried. But now, she saw another man as her real father. I closed the album and sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. My chest ached with a quiet truth. Memories may live forever in me, but they can fade in the heart of the one you love most. And yet, as I looked again at that crooked dollhouse tucked away in the corner of the room, I felt a strange resolve. She might forget, the world might overlook. But I would carry the proof of our bond, even if it lived only in me. There are walls you can see and touch, built from wood or stone. And then there are the other kinds, the invisible ones. The ones built slowly, word by word, gesture by gesture, until one day you find yourself on the wrong side of them. My daughter's home had such a wall. At first, I didn't notice it. The early years after the divorce were confusing enough. I was grateful for any time I got with her, so I ignored the subtle shifts. But over time, the pattern was impossible to miss. It showed up in the way her stepmother introduced me at gatherings. Not as Emily's father, but simply as John, just my name, without the word that carried decades of sacrifice. The first time, I laughed it off. By the 5th time, I knew it wasn't an accident. The wall showed in photographs, too. Family portraits lined their mantle, My daughter, her mother, her stepfather, smiling, polished, perfect. But never the years before. Never the birthday parties where the balloons sagged, but love overflowed. Never the beach days where I held her hand against the tide. Those memories lived only in my albums now. And the wall showed in invitations that never came. School recitals, award nights, holiday dinners. She's busy tonight, they'd say. Maybe next weekend. Next weekend rarely arrived. It was clear enough. There's no space for you here. But fathers are stubborn creatures. Love doesn't surrender easily. So I kept showing up, even when it hurt. That night, after leaving my daughter's home, the streets felt unusually empty. The houses I passed glowed with warm yellow light, silhouettes of families moving behind curtains. Laughter spilled faintly through windows, like music I could no longer dance to. I unlocked my small house and stepped inside. Silence welcomed me, heavier than the night air. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed with indifference. I placed my coat on the chair, not the hook, not the closet, just the chair, as though even routine had abandoned me. On the kitchen table sat a single photograph in a frame. My daughter at 10 years old, frosting smeared across her cheek on her birthday. I had baked the cake myself, the top slightly uneven, the sprinkles scattered like confetti by clumsy hands. She had laughed then. "Dad, it's perfect." I touched the frame and whispered to the empty room, "Do you remember?" Loneliness does strange things. It makes the walls lean closer, the shadows stretch longer. It makes a man talk to pictures as though they might answer. That night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the dark, staring at her smile frozen in time. I remembered the countless birthdays we had shared before life turned complicated. The balloon animals I had tried to twist, failing hilariously until she showed me how. The treasure hunts I invented in our backyard, hiding candy beneath flower pots. Those nights ended with her asleep on my shoulder, my heart convinced nothing could break what we had. But here I was, uninvited to her table, unwelcome in her celebration, the father outside the frame. I picked up the photo album from the shelf. Page after page unfolded like a story I once knew by heart. Christmas mornings with her tearing through wrapping paper. Summers at the beach, her hand gripping mine against the pull of the tide. Her first school recital, when she scanned the crowd until she found me, and her face lit up. Every picture was proof of a truth the world seemed to have forgotten. I was there. I had been there all along. The clock struck midnight. My house felt smaller, my chair harder, my chest heavier. I leaned back and closed my eyes, replaying her words from dinner. "I'm glad you're my real dad." Not to me, to him. The phrase echoed until it dulled into a hum. The kind that lingers like ringing in the ears after a loud concert. I clenched my fists, then let them go. I wanted to rage, to call her, to correct the record. But instead, I folded into silence, because silence felt safer than rejection. In that silence, though, I found a strange clarity. Fathers live lonely nights, but they also live stubborn mornings. And as the shadows stretched across my empty room, I promised myself one thing. I would not stop being her father, even if the world called someone else by that name. That night, I fell asleep in the chair, the photograph still in my hand, her childhood smile pressed against my heart. The night she called her stepfather her real dad, I caught a flicker across the table, her stepmother's mouth, curving ever so slightly. Not a smile, not quite. Something quieter. Satisfaction. My daughter didn't see it. Children, even when grown, can't always see the quiet rivalries adults carry. But I saw. And that faint curl of lips cut almost as deeply as the words themselves. That night, back in my small house, I opened the wooden memory box again. Inside lay fragments of the life I once shared with her, the crooked dollhouse I built from scrap wood, the Father's Day cards with uneven letters, the photos of our simpler years. Proof that I was there, proof that I mattered. But proofs don't change the present. And right now, the wall between us seemed taller than ever. I traced my fingers across one of her old crayon cards. In childish scrawl it read, "I love you, Daddy." I whispered to the empty room, "I love you too, sweetheart." My voice cracked in the silence. For a long time, I sat there in the dim glow of the lamp, wondering how something once so strong could be rewritten so easily. How a father could be reduced from hero to shadow without anyone seeming to notice. The truth was brutal. I was losing her, not through absence, but through replacement. And yet, beneath the ache, a small ember burned. Because deep down, I still believed walls could fall. That one day, she would look past the stories others had built around her and see again the man who never stopped being her father. That night, though, I was still outside the wall. The next morning came not with sunlight, but with resolve. The shadows of the previous night clung to me, but beneath them, something stirred, an urge to do, to create, to speak not with words, but with my hands. I walked into the garage, a space more cluttered than useful. Dust clung to forgotten tools, and a faint smell of sawdust lingered from projects long past. This place had been my refuge once, back when my daughter was little. We built together here, birdhouses, crooked shelves, a dollhouse that leaned like a tired soldier but stood firm through years of play. I stood in the middle of that messy sanctuary and thought, if she won't see me as her father at the table, maybe she will see me in the things I make. My hands ached as I gathered scraps of wood. They were leftovers, discarded by others, but to me they held promise. A true father's love has always been about turning what is little into enough. I set up the workbench and began. The first cuts were rough, clumsy even. My fingers trembled, not from age alone, but from the weight of memory. Each strike of the hammer echoed with moments I wished I could relive. The sound of her laughter when I first handed her a wooden toy horse. The way she clapped as if I'd performed magic. As I worked, I whispered to the silence, "This is for you, Emily. You may never know it, but it's you I'm shaping here." The hours slipped away. Morning turned into afternoon, and the cold garage became my cathedral. The saw's rhythm was my hymn, the sanding block my prayer. Every curl of wood shavings felt like a verse in a song I could no longer sing aloud to her. At one point, I paused, staring at the half-shaped figure in front of me. It was imperfect, humble, but so was fatherhood. No father I knew had perfect lines or polished edges. We were all a little uneven, a little rough. What mattered was the strength inside, the intention behind the work. I took a breath and pressed on, shoulders aching, sweat dampening my shirt. With each motion, I felt less invisible. Here, in this act of creation, I was still her father, undeniably so. No wall, no silence, no stepmother's smile could take this away. By evening, a form began to emerge. A gift, not expensive, not impressive to the untrained eye, but one carved out of love. The same kind of love that had carried her through storms and sleepless nights. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped back, exhaustion and tenderness mingling in my chest. The garage was dim now, the single bulb casting long shadows on the floor. My creation stood small but steady, like my place in her life, uncertain, overlooked, but still there. I placed it gently on the workbench and whispered, "Maybe one day, you'll understand." Then I turned off the light and let the darkness settle in, carrying with me the hope that even if my words failed, my hands might still speak. The garage smelled of sawdust again the next evening, a scent that had always meant possibility. For some men, it was just scraps of wood and dull tools. For me, it was memory, every cut and groove tied to a moment I never wanted to forget. I ran my hand across the half-finished gift, tracing its uneven edges. Each ridge reminded me of a night long ago when my daughter was 5. She had sat on my lap, holding a toy hammer, pretending to help me fix a shelf. She wore overalls that were too big for her, and her giggles bounced off the garage walls like music. "We're builders." "Daddy," she'd announced proudly, even though the shelf we made leaned so badly that books slid off one by one. That memory made my throat tighten. It was in this very place that our bond had been strongest, father and daughter creating something from nothing. Now I worked alone. The only sound was the scrape of sandpaper and the hum of my breath. Yet even in the solitude, I felt her presence, as if she lingered in the wood itself. I carved slowly, carefully. My hands, though rough and worn, moved with a gentleness born of love. With each stroke, I tried to etch in the things words could not capture, the nights of holding her through storms, the mornings of braiding her hair clumsily, the afternoons spent cheering at soccer games. Every motion of the chisel whispered, "I was here. I am still here." The longer I worked, the more the gift began to take shape. Not just as an object, but as a vessel for memory. A father's heart made visible in wood. At one point, I stopped and leaned against the workbench, sweat dampening my forehead despite the chill of the garage. I stared at what I had made, fear creeping in. Would she laugh at it? Would she push it aside the way she pushed me aside at the dinner table? The doubt gnawed at me. It whispered, "You're wasting your time. She already has a new father now." But I shook my head, gripping the chisel tighter. A father's love does not measure worth by recognition. It measures worth by persistence, by showing up again and again, even in silence. So I pressed on. Hours slipped by until the lines were smoother, the form clearer. My arms ached, my back stiffened, but I kept going. Because this was more than a gift, it was a testament. When I finally set the tool down, the garage was cloaked in deep shadows. The gift sat quietly on the bench, small and imperfect, but filled with the weight of memory. I touched it one last time, then exhaled, whispering into the darkness, "Do you remember, Emily? Because I always will." And for the first time in many days, my chest felt lighter, not because the wall between us had fallen, but because I had left another mark on it, one that maybe, just maybe, she might see someday. The nights after I finished the gift stretched long and restless. I would lie awake, the quiet of the house pressing down like a heavy blanket. The wooden figure sat in the garage, waiting, almost alive with the weight of my intention. Yet every time I thought about giving it to her, doubt crept in like a draft through a broken window. What if she didn't want it? What if she laughed? What if the simple thing I had poured my heart into became proof, not of my love, but of how out of place I had become in her life? I turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories collided with questions. I remembered the first time she lost a tooth. She had rushed into my room, holding the tiny piece of her childhood in her palm, her face lit with excitement. I was the one who slipped $1 under her pillow that night. Would she even recall that? Or would the years of distance blur those moments away? I sat up, restless, and walked to the garage. The bulb above flickered weakly, casting long shadows. There it was, the gift, sitting silently on the workbench. I traced my fingers along its edges, the uneven grooves, the polished spots where my hands had lingered longest. "Will this mean anything to you?" I whispered into the empty space. My voice cracked. "Or will it just remind you that your father isn't enough?" The garage didn't answer. Only the night did, with its cold stillness. Doubt has a cruel way of twisting memory. It makes you question the very things you know you gave. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts to keep her in school. The shoes I wore thin so she could have new ones, the sacrifices that no one applauded. And yet, a single sentence at a dinner table had erased it all. I leaned against the bench, covering my face with my hands. Maybe she was right to call him her real dad. He was there now, steady and present, while I lingered in the margins. Maybe my role had been temporary all along, needed for childhood, discarded in adulthood. The thought burned. I shook my head, gripping the wood tighter. No, I muttered. I was there. I am still here. But the doubt didn't vanish. It never does in one night. It lingered, whispering that love unacknowledged begins to feel invisible. That silence at the table might stretch into silence forever. Finally, exhausted, I sat down on the old stool. I stared at the gift until my eyes blurred with tears I refused to shed. I wanted to believe that one day she would understand. That she would see not the flaws in the carving, but the years it represented, the hands that had carried her, the heart that had never stopped beating for her. Still, as the clock ticked into the small hours, I knew this truth. Even love, when doubted long enough, begins to question itself. And that was the night I realized I wasn't just carving wood. I was carving hope against the grain of despair. The morning of her birthday dawned with a kind of brightness that felt cruel. Sunlight poured into my small kitchen, bouncing off the chipped linoleum and worn cabinets. Outside, the neighborhood was already alive. Cars starting, dogs barking, children shouting as they ran to the bus stop. But inside, it was silence that greeted me. Silence, and the weight of what I knew I could not have. I sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before I touched it. In front of me lay the small wooden gift, wrapped clumsily in brown paper and tied with string. It looked humble, almost pitiful next to the shiny packages I imagined filling her house that morning. Still, it was the only thing I had to give. I picked it up, holding it in my hands like something fragile. My thumb brushed across the edges where the wood wasn't perfectly smooth. I imagined her opening it, her fingers tracing the same grooves. Her eyes lighting up not because it was expensive, but because it was made by me. For a moment, that vision filled me with warmth. But just as quickly, doubt rushed back in, as it always did. I stood, slipped on my jacket, and placed the gift carefully into a small bag. My steps felt heavy as I walked to the door. The cool morning air hit my face when I stepped outside, sharp and bracing. Down the street, her house waited, a place once familiar, now foreign, almost forbidden. As I approached, I could already hear laughter drifting from inside. The sound of children running, voices calling out, the hum of a family gathering. My chest tightened. I paused at the edge of the driveway, staring at the front door that used to open for me. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of balloons tied to the chairs, streamers crisscrossing the ceiling. A cake set proudly in the middle of the dining table. My daughter's voice rang out, bright and full of joy. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, like standing in the warmth of a fire I could no longer touch. I stood there, unseen, listening to the celebration unfold. My hands clenched the bag tighter. I wanted so badly to knock, to step inside, to hand her the gift with my own trembling hands and say, "Happy birthday, Emily. I never stopped being your father." But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I walked quietly up the steps and placed the bag gently on the porch. I stood for a long moment, staring at it, as though trying to pour every unsaid word into that small package. My chest ached, my throat burned, but no tears came. Only silence. Then I turned, hands shoved deep into my pockets, and walked away. Behind me, the laughter continued, spilling out into the morning air. No one noticed me leave. No one called out my name. For them, the day went on. But for me, it felt as if the world had stopped at that porch, where I left not just a gift, but a piece of myself I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. The porch creaked softly under my weight as I lingered there, my hands still hovering over the gift I had set down. The morning air was crisp, cool enough to sting, and the faint scent of birthday cake drifted through the open window. Inside, laughter rose and fell, a chorus I once belonged to but now heard only from a distance. I crouched low, adjusting the package one last time. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, its edges uneven. Nothing about it looked impressive. But inside, it carried more than wood and string. It carried sleepless nights, years of memory, and a piece of my heart I couldn't find the words to give. For a moment, I hesitated. My hand trembled above the gift. Should I take it back? Should I keep it with me? A reminder that I still tried, even if unacknowledged. My throat tightened at the thought of her finding it, rolling her eyes, brushing it aside the way she brushed me aside at the table. But no, love wasn't about pride. Love was about leaving pieces of yourself even when no one asked for them. So I let my hand fall gently away, stood, and stepped back. I glanced once more through the window. My daughter sat at the table, candles glowing before her. Her friends cheered as someone lit the last one. She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling in the light, her smile wide and unguarded. My chest ached at the sight. I whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." The words slipped into the air and disappeared, lost among the sounds of laughter and celebration inside. Then I turned, walking down the steps, each one heavier than the last. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I moved away, head lowered, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. The house behind me grew smaller with every step, but the sound of voices carried, reminding me of where I was not wanted. I didn't look back again, because if I did, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to keep walking. For them, the day was filled with balloons, music, and cake. For me, it ended right there, on the porch, where I left a gift that said more than I ever could. I walked away that morning believing my gesture would vanish quietly, unnoticed. The little package sat there on the porch like a secret, a fragment of my heart left behind. I thought maybe she'd find it by accident, maybe not at all. I imagined her picking it up, puzzled, or worse, dismissing it without a second thought. But what I didn't know was that there had been another presence that day. Something unblinking, indifferent, but loyal in its way. A small black security camera, mounted just above the front door, had watched it all. The lens caught me in silence, the hunched shoulders, the way I bent low to set the gift down, the pause as my fingers lingered, and then the heavy retreat of my steps. It captured the whole scene, a father leaving love in the only place he could still reach. I didn't know. As I walked home, my hands deep in my pockets, all I felt was the emptiness of exclusion. The house behind me was full of music, but mine was filled with nothing but the echo of my own footsteps. I sat on my couch for hours that day, staring at the phone that never rang, listening for a knock that never came. Inside their house, the party rolled on. The children played games, cake was cut, pictures were taken. My daughter blew out her candles, her friends cheered, and the moment moved on, as birthdays do. But later, when the guests left and the noise died down, someone remembered the porch. A small bag sat there, patient and unassuming. It was carried inside, placed on a table, and for a while it blended in with the clutter of wrapping paper and discarded ribbons. Nobody questioned its arrival. Not yet. Only the camera knew. Only it had seen who had placed it there. The hours passed. Evening fell. My daughter, still glowing from the day, noticed the bag. She tilted her head, curious, and opened it. Out came the small wooden carving, rough yet tender, edges smoothed by tired hands. She ran her fingers along its grooves, puzzled. "Who left this?" she asked. Her mother shrugged. "Probably a neighbor. Or maybe one of your friends forgot to hand it to you." The stepfather glanced at it, said nothing. But my daughter stared longer, her eyes narrowing as if somewhere, deep down, a recognition stirred. The shape of the carving seemed familiar, not because she had seen it before, but because it carried a kind of fingerprint, the kind only love leaves behind. That night, when the house was quiet, she scrolled through her phone, replaying moments from the day. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she tapped into the feed from the porch camera. A recording blinked to life. And there I was. She saw me step into frame, my jacket pulled tight against the morning chill. She watched as I placed the package gently on the ground. Pausing longer than necessary, my hand reluctant to let go. She saw me stand there, motionless, lips moving though no sound could be heard. She leaned closer, watching intently, and though the camera offered no audio, she could almost read the words on my mouth. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Then she saw me turn, shoulders slumped, and walk away, fading out of the frame like a ghost that had never been meant to be seen. She froze, staring at the screen. Her breath caught, her hand trembled. In that instant, the carving on her nightstand and the man on the screen fused into one undeniable truth. The gift wasn't from a neighbor. It wasn't from a stranger. It was from her father, the one who had been there in silence, still giving even when uninvited. Her heart ached in a way that laughter and candles could not soothe. She replayed the footage again and again, each time her eyes lingering longer on the way I hesitated. The way I almost reached back for the gift before finally letting go. Each replay dug deeper, breaking through the walls built by pride, by misunderstanding, by the narrative she had been led to believe. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of my presence, not loud, not demanding, but steady, faithful, and painfully quiet. The forgotten camera had remembered what everyone else overlooked, a father's love laid bare in the simplest of gestures. And though I never knew it that night, it was that camera that kept me from disappearing entirely. That night, long after the party had ended and the house lay quiet, my daughter sat cross-legged on her bed with the little wooden carving resting in her lap. The gift had been unwrapped hours earlier, set aside between shiny boxes and crumpled wrapping paper. At first it had seemed unremarkable, even strange, too simple to belong among the glitter and plastic. But now, in the silence of her room, it was the only gift she couldn't stop looking at. Her fingers traced the grooves, pausing over the uneven lines. The faint scent of sawdust still clinging to the wood. It wasn't perfect, but there was something about its imperfections that made it feel alive, like it carried fingerprints. Not from a machine, but from hands that knew patience and sacrifice. Her curiosity deepened. She whispered to herself, "Who made this?" It wasn't the kind of present her stepfather would buy. He was a man of gadgets and store-bought solutions. Her mother hadn't mentioned it, either. That left only mystery, one that tugged at her heart even as she tried to ignore it. She reached for her phone and pulled up the porch camera footage again. The moment unfolded just as it had before, a man approaching quietly. Shoulders hunched against the morning chill, jacket pulled close. He knelt, placed the package carefully, lingered too long, as if reluctant to part with it. Then he turned away, disappearing down the path. Her breath caught. She paused the video, zoomed in on his face. The image was grainy, but clear enough. She knew that jawline, that weary expression. She had seen those eyes before, eyes that carried both sorrow and love in equal measure. It was her father. The realization hit her with a force that left her trembling. Suddenly, the carving in her lap felt heavier, infused with meaning she hadn't wanted to face. All day, she had laughed with friends, called another man dad, and dismissed the quiet ache that flickered whenever she thought of the one who wasn't there. And yet here he was, in the only way he knew how, leaving a piece of himself on the porch, unseen, unheard, but undeniable. Tears welled in her eyes. She set the carving gently on the bedspread, then covered her mouth with both hands to muffle the sob rising in her throat. She replayed the video again and again, as though watching might undo the ache it stirred. But it didn't. Each replay only pressed the truth deeper. Her father had come, even though he wasn't invited. She thought of the years past, the small birthdays when he baked cupcakes himself, when balloons were blown up unevenly, when the living room looked like a party store exploded because he wanted to make it special even on a tight budget. She thought of the mornings he tied her shoelaces, the nights he stayed awake helping with school projects, the lunches packed in bags with notes she pretended not to care about at the time. The carving wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of all those invisible acts that had stacked up quietly through her life, shaping the foundation of who she was. Her chest tightened with guilt. She whispered into the quiet room, "Dad, I'm sorry," but the words fell into empty space, unheard. Too late for the man who had walked away believing his love had gone unnoticed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept the carving close, clutching it like a lifeline, as if it might bridge the distance between what had been lost and what could still be reclaimed. For the first time in a long while, she realized that the word real wasn't defined by who sat at the head of the table. It was defined by who had carried her through storms, quietly, faithfully, without asking for recognition. And though she didn't know it yet, this single act of curiosity, this need to know the truth of one small wooden gift, would change everything. The house was still that night, but her heart was restless. My daughter lay beneath the glow of her bedside lamp, the wooden carving close at hand. She hadn't let it out of her sight since finding it. Every time she looked at it, something stirred, something that felt both familiar and foreign, like a language she once spoke fluently but had forgotten. She opened her phone again. The porch camera app loaded slowly, but she didn't mind. She needed to see it once more. Needed to know it wasn't a dream. That the image of me placing the gift hadn't been some trick of her imagination. The video played. There I was again, shoulders stooped, jacket zipped to the chin, moving like a man burdened by more than the weather. She watched me kneel, set the package down, hesitate. She saw my lips move, words too soft for the camera, yet clear enough to be read. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She gasped quietly, her throat tightening. She had known it the first time, but now it felt undeniable. Tears prickled her eyes as she replayed it again, then again. Each repetition peeled away another layer of defense she had built against me. She whispered to herself, "He was here. He never forgot." Her mind raced through all the moments she had pushed aside, times she had dismissed me, chosen silence over a call, believed the narrative that I was no longer necessary in her world. Now those choices weighed heavy, colliding with the truth unfolding on her screen. She turned the phone sideways, enlarging the image. There was no mistaking it. The way I shifted my feet nervously, the pause of my hand as though reluctant to let go. That wasn't the gesture of a stranger. That was her father, her real father, still giving, even when uninvited. Her chest ached. The birthday balloons still floated in the corner of her room, now mocking in their cheerfulness. The pile of brightly wrapped gifts suddenly looked hollow compared to the single wooden carving lying beside her. She reached for it again, clutching it tight. The rough edges scratched against her palm, but she welcomed the sting. It made it real. She closed her eyes, imagining me in the dim light of some workshop, laboring over every groove and curve, pouring into Wood the love I couldn't express in words. For the first time, she asked herself, how many times had he done this? How many acts of quiet devotion had gone unnoticed because no camera had captured them? Her tears came freely now, slipping down her cheeks, dripping onto the carving she held close. She didn't bother wiping them away. They felt like a confession, an offering to the truth she could no longer ignore. The replay button waited on her phone, a silent invitation. And she pressed it again. She needed to see me walk up, needed to see me leave, needed to remind herself that love could exist even in silence, even when uninvited. It hurt, but it healed too. Because with every replay, she realized more deeply that she hadn't been forgotten. Not once, not ever. The camera had shown her what her own eyes had been too blind to see. A father's love, steady and unyielding, captured in a moment she would never again let slip away. The carving sat cradled in her hands, its weight far greater than its size. Each curve of the wood felt like a message, each imperfection like a whisper of sacrifice. My daughter pressed it against her chest, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry for me. The tears began as soft tremors, a few quiet drops on her cheeks. But soon they came faster, heavier, streaming down until her pillow was damp. She buried her face into the carving, her sobs muffled. But nothing could mute the ache inside her. In the dim glow of her bedside lamp, memories returned uninvited. She saw me kneeling at her bedside when she had fevers, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. She saw me tying her shoelaces before school, my hands clumsy but determined. She saw birthdays from years past, cheap decorations, a cake that leaned to one side, balloons taped awkwardly to the walls. She remembered laughing then, thinking the lopsidedness was funny. But now she saw it differently. It had been love, not lack. And then she remembered her words at the dinner table. Real dad. Words spoken casually, almost thoughtlessly, but sharp enough to slice through years of devotion. She had seen me flinch, though I tried to hide it. She remembered my silence, the brittle smile that masked the wound. And now, seeing the footage of me leaving a gift in the rain, she realized the silence had been heavier than any argument could have been. Her chest ached with guilt. She whispered into the stillness of her room, "I didn't know, Dad. I didn't see. I'm sorry." Her stepfather had never whittled wood until his fingers cracked. Never stayed up late balancing bills while making sure she had everything for school. He was kind in his own way, yes, but kindness wasn't the same as sacrifice. And in her heart, she finally understood that the word real wasn't defined by the comfort of a dinner table. It was written in the scars on a father's hands. She lifted the carving again, holding it to the light. The shadows of the grooves fell across her palm like lines of a story. It wasn't polished, but neither was love. Love was messy, uneven, shaped by effort more than elegance. The tears wouldn't stop. She curled up on her bed, the carving clutched to her chest like a lifeline. For hours she lay there, waves of sorrow and recognition washing over her. She thought of calling me right then, but fear held her back. Fear that it was too late. Fear that she had built a wall too high for even love to climb. But even in her doubt, one truth rang clear: I had never abandoned her. Even when pushed away, I had remained near. Even when my presence was unwelcome, I found a way to leave love at her door. The carving was proof. The video was proof. And her tears, flowing freely at last, were proof too. Proof that the truth had finally broken through. By the time the first light of dawn crept through her curtains, she was exhausted, her eyes swollen, her pillow stained. Yet she felt something new stirring inside her, a determination, a longing, a fragile but undeniable need to make things right. That night, she hadn't just cried for me. She had cried herself awake to the reality of what love truly meant. Morning broke softly, but in her heart the weight of the night still lingered. My daughter moved through the day in a haze, the wooden carving never leaving her side. She kept it in her backpack, pulling it out between classes, her fingers brushing over it like a talisman. The laughter of her friends rang hollow now. Their talk of gifts and parties felt shallow compared to the truth she carried within her. By evening, she couldn't bear the silence any longer. The video replayed in her mind every few minutes, and the thought of me walking away unseen gnawed at her. She had to find me. She had to tell me what words had never been spoken. Her steps were hesitant as she approached the small apartment where she knew I lived. The building was plain, weathered by time, far removed from the cheer of her mother's suburban house. She climbed the narrow stairwell, her heart thudding, each step a question. Would he want to see me? Would he turn me away? She reached the door. For a moment, she froze, the carving clutched to her chest. Then she knocked, lightly at first, then again, louder. The sound echoed down the hallway. Inside, I stirred. The knock was unexpected. Visitors were rare in my quiet life. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, eyes swollen, cheeks streaked from tears, I could hardly breathe. My hand gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Dad," she whispered, the word fragile, trembling. I swallowed hard, afraid to speak in case my voice cracked. Instead, I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She entered slowly, looking around at the modest space, the worn furniture, the small table stacked with unopened letters, the faint scent of wood shavings from the tools I still used. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then she held out the carving, her hands shaking. "I know it was you," she said. "I saw the video. You were there." My chest tightened. I lowered my gaze, ashamed and yet relieved that the truth was out. "I didn't want to cause trouble," I murmured. "I just wanted you to have something from me. Something real." Her lips quivered. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you fight to be there?" I sighed, my shoulders heavy. Because sometimes love is quieter than words. Sometimes it's enough just to be near, even if no one notices. Her tears came again, and she stepped forward, closing the gap between us. The carving slipped from her fingers onto the table as she threw her arms around me. I noticed she sobbed into my chest. "I didn't before, but I do now. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I held her tightly, my own tears finally breaking free. In that embrace, the years of silence, the weight of absence, and the ache of being overlooked melted into something else, something stronger, something whole. We stood there for what felt like forever, two hearts finding each other again after too long apart. No expensive gifts, no fancy parties, just a father and a daughter, bound by love that had survived even in shadows. That night, I wasn't a ghost at the table anymore. I was her father again. The evening was quiet again, but the silence was no longer heavy. My daughter sat beside me on the worn sofa in my modest living room, the carving resting between us like a bridge. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm, cars passing, voices drifting, but for us, time felt paused, as if the world wanted to give us this moment. She traced her fingers over the wooden lines once more. "I used to think love meant big things," she admitted softly. "Fancy dinners, expensive gifts, being the loudest voice in the room. But this, she lifted the carving. This is different. It feels like love I didn't deserve, but always had. I shook my head gently. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Love isn't earned by perfection or lost by mistakes. It just is. It endures, even when it's ignored, even when it hurts. She leaned against my shoulder, the way she had as a little girl after a long day. For the first time in years, I felt the simple weight of her closeness. No walls, no awkwardness, no stepfather between us. Just a father and his daughter, together. Later that week, she showed the carving to a few friends at school. Word spread, and soon her classmates weren't talking about the size of birthday parties or the price of gifts. They were talking about the video. About the father who left a handmade present on the porch even when he wasn't welcome inside. And somehow, the story grew larger than us. People online shared it, called it a reminder of real love. Thousands of strangers commented with their own stories of quiet parents, of sacrifices unseen. For the first time, my daughter realized she wasn't alone, and neither was I. She came back to me one evening with tears in her eyes, but these tears were different. They weren't just sorrow anymore, they were gratitude. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you for never leaving. Even when I made it seem like I wanted you to." I didn't need more words. I pulled her close, and she held on tight. The carving was still in her hands, pressed between us like a vow. We would not lose each other again. In the end, the world may forget the birthday parties and the decorations, but it won't forget the quiet acts of love. My daughter learned that truth not through my speeches, but through my silence. Through the gift left at a door, through the steady presence that refused to vanish. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it only waits, faithfully, patiently, until it is seen. And when it is finally seen, it changes everything. Thank you, dear listeners, for walking this journey with me here on the Storytelling Dad. May these stories remind you to cherish the quiet love around your own tables, in your own homes. I wish you health, peace, and moments of true connection with your families. Until next time, take care of each other, and never forget that love, in its purest form, never needs an invitation.